which we have discussed many different times. And then yesterday, another barrage of stories about roster management, revenue sharing, and much more. And from Ross Dellinger, from Pete Thamel, among others, even Dan Murphy, this is the story from yesterday evening that the new age or details on college football's model into the future, and again, this may be the case, scholarship expansion, which means, for example, a baseball team that normally has 11.7 scholarships to spread out among 32 players on a roster. Some don't get anything. Will now have the option going forward that it could be 32 scholarships. Also, the average revenue sharing based on budgets, expenses, revenues for college programs among the power or autonomy schools. There's also damages. We've been saying 1.4 million could be almost 3 billion, or 1.4 billion could be twice that much. But of everything on here, Craig and Paul, that I saw, is the deadline they need, and this is good. Deadlines make things happen, not the end of the year, but something needs to be formalized or at least grabbed onto moving forward within the next 40 days. Of all of that, no matter how much more universities and athletic programs have to spend, that timeline was a number that we said, heard a lot of and read a lot of yesterday evening.
Yeah, to get a nearly $3 billion settlement done in 40 days is quite look, they have to get this done. Now, does this guarantee they're out of court? No, but it guarantees they're out of this court. And if the NCAA decides to foot the whole bill, that's good news for the schools as they move forward, trying to do something that you saw in the tweet could probably cost them up to $300 million a year. There's a lot of actually good ideas and good things in this, which is rare. But Mal, maybe they've been forced into certain things, and we're going to see some change. And getting this done in 40 days might mean, rapid fire. Here's where some new rules are going to come down.
Yeah, I mean, let's call this what it is. It's a concept. Mm-hmm. It's not anything that's being officially done just yet, but it is a concept on a new model. And so this is, at least ideas coming together and maybe some progress towards being the actual solution for at least the next few years, because I think we all know that there's no solution that outside of regular full employment, which they've evaded like it's the plague at every point in turn so far. Beyond that, there is nothing to guarantee you peace and solidarity for the inevitable future. I mean, so this is something that they're trying to work on to basically give themselves about a decade, right? Like a decade worth of peace and quiet potentially before more things pile up. But I mean, it sounds, I'm somebody who's just looking for them to solve it however they possibly can. It's not my checkbook that's cutting the money to pay the past athletes and the future revenue shares and all those types of things. But it's obvious that just all these things kind of coming together, they like the dam is going to break, right? Like if they don't solve some things here pretty soon. So this seems reasonable. It seems feasible. It seems like there's actually something to it, which is why Ross is reporting on it. Now, I know there's been other ideas that are kind of like they're there one day and then they're gone. But this one's got a bit more detail and it covers all of the bases. So yeah, if they can somehow come to an agreement on the revenue sharing, that eliminates the future issues as far as paying athletes. If you can come to a settlement on the back pay, that clears that out entirely. And then you figure out the revenue share part. Now, I still, I'll always tell you, I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know how having a cap of some sort would work and how that would be regulated or how that would be viewed. But if you can come to an agreement on that, I think that would be incredible for all parties. And, of course, here's the thing about the cap, so to speak, is I'm sure there will be a way through NIL where if Georgia wants to pay more, they can pay more, but it at least puts everybody kind of in the same park that's going to be playing together. So, yeah, it pretty much addresses everything, and it puts a deadline on it, like you said. So that gives us a little less than 2 months for this to all come together and get finalized. And if that could happen, that would be fan-freaking-tastic because it would knock out a lot of birds with one big stone of a college model here that we are seeing Ross and various others report on.
Start of his story was about the Scottsdale, Arizona, where they had Big 12 conference meetings. We mentioned Yormark even a couple of days ago. And it was Dave Aranda hustling out the lobby door. I'm going to see the Arizona Cardinals, he said. Got to learn how to do all of this. And a lot of it was about roster management, how do you form a roster when you could end up with some sort of, again, these numbers, whatever 20, 22 million, that doesn't mean that's going to be the number or how they'll do it going forward, but just kind of like, hey, I got to go learn this new system of how we're going to do it in college football.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I do think the scholarship limits being taken off on baseball would be huge, especially for the SEC schools who are already, really thriving right now. If you were to take off that cap, then I think that would be incredible news for baseball players. But, yeah, roster construction just in general, I think a lot of that comes down to, like, coaches just, like, tell me what I'm supposed to do and what I'm supposed to have and how I'm supposed to get there, and then I'll figure out the rest of it. But, yeah, that's become more complicated than ever before because of so many one-and-dones and so many transfers in and out. And, yeah, I can only imagine what Dave Aranda and others are trying to wrap their heads around, and getting some advice from the NFL, I guess, makes some sense. Whatever you can get advice from and trying to do the best job you can. I mean, he certainly is in a position where he needs to do that. So if the Cardinals end up helping him win a couple more games, then it was the right move to go and talk to them.
Yeah, but it was interesting. One of the other notes about it, I thought, was the fact that the NCAA might bite this big bullet. This billion plus two, or how many billions of dollars that the NCAA would then pay that out over, I think the term was a decade.
Right.
And the autonomy schools, which thought they might be paying for part of this because they're part of this lawsuit, might not have to, but they'll have to come up with extra money as they move forward with some of the new rules and how college athletics will work.
Here's why I think it's a good idea for the NCAA to do this and avoid a fight with some of those power conferences. The power conferences could make a real argument that, look, we've been wanting to do this for a very long time. You're the ones who were stopping us from doing it. Now, granted, that's a circular argument because the member schools are the NCAA, but, like, they're the ones who are like, you made the rule, like we're the one. We didn't slow it down. You did, and I get it that it's a little bit circular, but the NCAA has this money in the coffers. And if it has the money to be able to do this, it needs to go ahead and do it because the more they can get this settled and moved on, and they don't have to snipe each other about, oh, well, it's more the SEC and Big Ten's fault, or, the Big 12's like, well, this is really more of a you guys problem. I mean, you took our schools and all this and, all those things. If the NCAA just pays it, then they can move on and then set up the structures they're going to set it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some issues. This is dealing with the House case. There's another lawsuit that he mentions that would be an entirely separate thing. So this is not like it gets you completely into the free and clear, but it does take a huge load off of your plate that you've been dealing and wrestling with for, quite a while now at this point, to the point of, I think, damn near mental exhaustion for some of us following along with it, figuring out how they're ever going to get to a solution. And so this appears to be a solution to a rather large set of issues on their plate, but not the end of the road entirely. I do think there are questions about some of these things, but here's the deal. That money that you just talked about is way less than what it could be if they want to take this to court. Not even counting for lawyer fees, just the settlement that they could be handed if they were to try and actually test this out. They're not going to win. When have they ever won in court? And when have they ever won in a case like this, where they're clearly in the wrong as far as athlete back pay? I mean, that number could be $5 billion as opposed to the sub 3 or sub 2 million they could end up paying. So that's simple right there. I mean, that's why you settle, because the alternative is paying twice as much.
Yes.
And maybe not even having a decade to do it. Maybe being told, like, hey, half now, half in 6 months. I mean, I don't know how all that works, but it seems like a pretty sweet deal if you can get away with it. A lower number total-wise, lower money number total, and a bit of a time to actually pay it off. I think you take that and you run with it as fast as you possibly can. So, again, these are negotiations. This is an idea, but it does appear, and we heard from the lawyer spearheading the House case, and I think very open to getting something settled. Not looking to try to drag this out and make this torturous for everybody, but let's see if they can actually finalize this, and if so, I think it's a big, big deal. I think there's a lot of questions about other areas, like the scholarship lack of limits. Like, how would that work in football? Because you could see where the richer schools could then kind of just bring everybody. But then again, guys are going to want to play. So that's like a whole different conversation. But you could hoard guys, theoretically. And then, you know what, at the same time.
Which is what they did back in the days
Right.
where there was no scholarship limit at Oklahoma or Nebraska
Yeah.
and at Texas and Ohio State back in the days of the 60s and 70s.
And eventually you're going to cut guys at the end of the year like you do anyways. And eventually guys are going to leave because they want playing time. So, again, that's a separate sort of a conversation. It's an interesting one, though, because I think that could get kind of squirrely in some ways because we know that in college athletics, somebody – if not somebody's, are going to take advantage of whatever rule is out there. But beyond that, I think this would be a godsend for college sports, at least on the surface.
Well, with the one of the things obviously that was in this, and we haven't gotten to it yet, is the expansion of scholarships in other sports. So the 11.7 for baseball and softball would be no more, and so we'll talk about that in a second. But in that football scholarships could be reduced. And I don't think where normally you would hear people freak out about that they're going to reduce the scholarships. I'm hearing Matt Rule talk about it this week. It's like, do you really need 85 now? Especially if you're going to have, he's like, NFL has a 53-man roster. Now, obviously we need more than that because this is kind of a different thing. But do you need 85? Especially if now, post-COVID, we've seen teams okay, we have 7 extra scholarships. Congratulations, Jimmy Walk-On. You're getting a scholarship.
Well, NILs are set up now to give money to non-scholarship or walk-on players. So that kind of can make you allow to kind of skew the number of how many you have on scholarship that, although getting paid, are not technically on scholarship. Yeah,
no, there are, like I said, there are some questions like how does this affect women's sports? How does this affect non-revenue sports? We're talking and focusing on football and probably mostly men's basketball and maybe a little bit of baseball and women's basketball. But how are those affected by this? Because from a football point of view, you take this deal and you run with it in a second. But how does it affect other sports? I don't know that that's very clear. And also, where does the collective bargaining come in to play here? Where is that? Because I don't know that that's what you go for if you're the players, if that's not included, right?
Well, we're going to have Darren Heitner on in a minute, who's an NIL attorney, also has a legal firm, about that. And then also over the next few days, we'll have more who could explain what all this might mean. Yes. I don't know. I like employees, collective bargaining, all this stuff. We don't know. And so you're right. I don't know if you can do this without there being some sort of employees, collective bargaining, antitrust. I'm not smart enough to get all of that. So that's a great question, Craig, and also a point, too. Amanda Kristovich is going to join us. She covers a lot of the legal issues in college athletics. Never ceases to amaze me how much NCAA and top conferences are twisting themselves in the knots, admitting they know they should pay the players, but trying to keep them from being employees. She'll join us today at 4:30.
Yeah, well, have you ever paid somebody for something that is not technically employed by you? Look, if I hire somebody to come and fix my plumbing, I mean, he's employed by a plumber, but technically he's working for me, right? So, are you going to 1099 all these guys? What are you going to do? Are they freelancers? How are you, it is. It's interesting to be like, oh, no, they're not employees. They're something else. And but their salary is going to be $47,000 a year.
Yep.
But that's a very weird thing.
Greg, anything else? No, all right.